Alright, cool. Should be working now. And as usual, okay, I'm gonna start in a bit. Perfect. Now I just need to post it on my IG. Link. Great. Okay, this is what we are sculpting. Continue to sculpt this from yesterday. We kind of left it to dry a little bit, and I noticed the cloth that I use is maybe a little moldish. Oh, it's leaving this dust residue, which I don't really like. So I will need to think about this. Okay, let me set up my workspace. Right. Let's continue where we left off. I think first things first. It's a little maybe too dry now. So I'm gonna wet this. And clean this up. Because yesterday when I carved this, it was still rather moist. But today, now that it's slightly harder, I could get it to be more in shape of what I want it to be, which is more squarish and blockish rather than roundish. So I'm going to try clean out the excessive clay. So I'm digging out and thinning the walls. Right, I'm trying to thin out the walls to make sure it's even on all sides. You can see that today, after we left it to dry overnight, the walls have kind of hardened on the external, so it holds its shape. Even though I'm using a bit of force to hold on to it, it doesn't warp as compared to yesterday. So the thing with when it comes to detailing and sculpting, you just kind of want your clay to be slightly dry. Right. I'm not going to use my bending wheel for now. I'm just going to continue to do this. You notice that I'm just rotating 90 degrees and carving. So it's trying to recreate this square on the inside. Because it's not going to be perfect, which is why you would then use your use your fingers to kind of smoothen it out. Just using fingers and water to smoothen the walls out. But you notice that when I'm doing something like this, the inside is gonna be roundy instead. So, which is okay for now. I think I'll decide later. But it's definitely much cleaner than when we just left it. So I'm gonna lift this the top for now. And what I'll do is I will wash my fingers a little bit. And these pieces, I'm just gonna dump it into this border, which I'm gonna make into slip. So slip, or what we call slip, is basically dried clay. You leave them to dry before you re-wet them again, and sometimes you add vinegar to it, so it becomes this stickier base which you use to hold two sides together. When you want to attach another piece to another piece, it's always good to have some slip available. So what's next? So you can see my face is dry, and even though the shape is roughly there of the face, you can see the eyes. It's still a little bit messy. So what I'm gonna do is, before I start hollowing out, I will clean up the face. Right, and today is, because it's much drier today, you can feel the weight. It's definitely much easier to hold and clean up and do some sculpting today. What I'm doing now is just smoothing out the eye socket so the eyes can be seen. right? I use a very delicate tool to carve out the details. Yes. Can tell I haven't done this in a while, so it's really not as shapy as I would like it to be. And then one of those, I'll use my brush to just clean it up with a little bit of water. And then same thing, I will try and detail the face. Just clean it up from yesterday. And that's done. So same thing, always good to use a brush to smoothen it out. As long as it's not too wet, it shouldn't ruin the shape too much. So having a brush is always handy. Okay, I think it's okay for now. So what I want to do now is the more tedious part, which is hollowing it out. Why do we need to hollow out? Is because when you create something like this, it's often hard for it to be dry on the inside, for it to lose the water in it. So even if you leave this to bone dry, even though on the outside it might look like it's completely dried up, but there might still be moist water in the inside. And if you were to send it for firing, it could likely cause it to explode, right? Because it's when you just leave it in a room to dry, it's going to absorb the temperature from the outside. So the outside is definitely going to be much more dry than the inside. So with pieces that are thick like this, you usually want to hollow it out and empty it out. And also reduce the weight, because if you were to really fire this, it's also going to be really heavy. So you can see it's so much more heavier and harder to carve out now because it has kind of hardened. So what I'll do is I always like to draw a circle and just continuously carve inside to get most of the clay out. And this is the part where it's tedious, but you also can't really rush it, because as much as you want to quickly take everything out, you also need to make sure that you don't exert too much force, then you kind of thin out your walls, or you poke through and you leave a hole on the outside. So this is a part that requires a bit of control and patience, even though I'm not the most patient one. A lot of times I make a lot of mistakes here by carving too much string, because I still have problems gauging sometimes. So usually I'll just do a certain thickness, right, before I start to examine the depth of the walls. So you see inside it's really messy. I don't think you can see much, but this is how I usually take a hole, and then I'll just keep going deeper and deeper until you feel like it's quite near. You can almost feel that it's thin. I'm going to leave about maybe, how many cm is that? Maybe a cm thickness. And you don't want to go thinner than that. There's definitely people who prefer thinner. For me, it's like I always do it on the thicker side so that it holds its shape, and I prefer it to have a little bit more weight. So this is what I'm doing. I'm gonna try and adjust the light so that I can see. Oh, this is what happens when this thing is not the most sturdy. I probably need a new setup, a new light. Okay, the light is gonna be here. So I'm gonna maybe shift it here so you can see. Right. Same thing, let's with the light. Now I can see on the inside. And I can gauge how deep I'm carving. Okay. It's definitely perhaps a little bit too dry to do a cleanup on the inside, so I probably need to moist it later. But for now, I think let's just get most of the clay out. Okay, still a lot that I need to duck. Okay, I'm quite close to the edge now, so I need to be careful. So from now, I'm just gonna try and even out the walls instead of digging it any further. This side is still a little too thick. So you can use your fingers to feel how deep is it and where you still need to carve. Here. I think it's good enough because I leave it quite thick because I want to still try and sculpt from the inside. Great. So before I continue sculpting, I think what I'll do is I want to make sure that I'm not this excessive clay. I wedge it down again. I probably need to use it. It's getting a little dry, so it's quite hard to wedge it down. Nice, because if I leave it out to dry, it might be completely too dry and it'll be hard to use it again if I need it. So I'm just gonna wedge it down and wet it and store it properly. So anytime I still need to use it, I can just use it. So okay, great. So I'm just gonna wet this cloth. I'm gonna store this. And then we continue back. So same thing, I think it's a little dry on the inside. I'm gonna need some water to shape this. You can see it collapse because I kinda has it carved a little bit too much on this edge. This is why I mentioned it's important to always take it slow and feel your walls occasionally to see if you have dug too much causing it to collapse. I think you can still afford to carve out some here. Okay, I think this is enough thickness because you can see I'm starting to shape it on the inside. You see that I can push things out to create this roundness. Even though we sculpted that yesterday, I think what we can do now is that we can sculpt it actually from the inside, but you need to make sure that it doesn't get too thin or it will cause crack. You can see here is a slight crack here because it's a bit too thin, so you want to patch it, right? So it's good to have your excess clay and just make sure that you patch the part up. I think that's the tricky thing about sculpting and hollowing, the part where you need to leave things to dry before you start sculpting. You need to understand the temperature that you're kind of leaving it in. It's good to always keep a moist towel over it. So it's better to let it just be a little dry rather than too dry. So if you don't have time to continue after a while, it's always good to make sure that you store it properly, either in a container with a wet towel wrapped around it, or if you're leaving it out in the open, just check on it occasionally and make sure the towel is wet enough to keep it moist. Because right now, I think it's definitely a little bit too dry, so you can start to see it cracking just from my force when I'm cleaning the insides. You can see this is definitely too dry, it's all cracking up, which is fine. What I'll do is I'll just need to wake it up with water, right? And just be slightly gentler on this side. And once again, I'm just cleaning the walls on the inside. And then I will need to fix this hole. Look at how ugly crack is now. So what I'll do is I will need to add clay back. Right, and I'll just need to be very careful about this area. This is where I probably need my bending wheel. this wall here is definitely too thin. So what I'll do is I'll actually I'll use back the clay that we dug out just now. Right, see, just adding it in a bit of water and keeping it moist. Now you have a good clay to salvage this taste. It needs to be a lot more. So just kind of pinch what you need and just add in back to the wall. And sculpt it from there. Make sure they attach well. You don't want any air bubbles within. So you want to kind of make sure that all gaps are closed. Great, then now you just have to clean up. Then you just off your hole. So usually when I'm doing a piece, I would kind of not leave it undone for too long. The case is I might have the habit of working on two different designs at the same time. So then I have time to leave one design to dry while I work on a new one and then come back to sculpt the first one and vice versa. Because when you leave it to dry overnight and if you don't watch over it and make sure it's stored properly and in a good moist area, it can get too dry, and when it gets too dry it's going to be hard to work with, right? So yeah, I think we managed to save back the wall, but of course it's not the most ideal shape right now, which I'm always not the most particular, but we can come back to carve out now in a bit. But the most important thing is we want to make sure it's flat, so that it stays flat. And especially the face pattern with the eye has to be sculpted. And you can see often when I go through this step of hollowing out, the eyes are a bit deformed. They don't lie as flat. it's normal. So again, we'll come back to sculpt this. Let me just clean out the excess clay from my hands. Start this. And the next part will be, let me see if we can pull the light over without it falling. Come on. I really need to adjust my desk lamp. Okay, for now, it's much brighter. Okay, I think I'm quite happy with the shape. I'm just gonna smoothen out slightly the bumps. And now we're gonna think about how we want to attach these two together. Right. So before I do that, I need to maybe think about how I'm attaching it. From yesterday, we thought about it doesn't have to be straight. I kind of like it a little bit slanted. But the idea is, do we want it like this, diagonally from the face, or perpendicular? We'll do perpendicular because it's kind of like a sketch. So this is the part where I might be a little bit scary. Because it's a little dry. One moment. I wonder. Oh, sorry, just checking my own audio. Okay, this is the part where it's a little scary because now I have to take a hole through this thing. I'm gonna attach this. I'm just gonna wing it. And I'm gonna drill this hole through. Dum. Right, and we kind of did it. It has to be bigger though, so I'm gonna use a bigger one. And same thing, I'm gonna drill through and pull up. Drill through and pull up. I'm gonna try and carve out a slightly bigger hole. And now you can see how thick the wall is actually. Okay, it's getting pretty dry, so I need to make sure that it's moist enough for attachment. Okay, that should be good enough. I'm gonna do this now. So I kind of like it slanted. Maybe something like this. Right, something like this would be nice. Yeah, kind of like it like this. So the attachment part, what we did yesterday is scoring or cross hatching. So what you want to do is just score it randomly in different direction. And same for this part where you're gonna attach it. It's okay to be rough because you want them to join. And then this is when you should be applying sleep, but I don't have any sleep available at the moment, so I'm gonna just use water, and at this stage it should still be fine. And what you can do is take a bit of very dry clay, make it super wet, and just kind of plastered it. Yeah. To balance it out, and then you want to attach it. How was it that we wanted? Something like this, right? And yeah, because it's not an even hair shape, so what I'll do is I'll just pin down the area I want it to be stick, and then I'll need to fill this hole up with clay that I have. So for now, I'm gonna just use this. Right, you just want to make sure that the gaps are covered, the joints are also connected. Same thing, we're not going to be too bothered about how messy and ugly it is at this point of time. We really just want to make sure that these two pieces are well connected with the support that they need. Gonna need more clay. It's gonna look pretty weird, but it's okay. We can kind of make it work. I'm more concerned of attaching the two pieces together first. So what I'm doing is I'm attaching pieces of clay to the gaps and the joint, and then just kind of molding both sides together so that it has the support it needs to hold them together, and kind of pray that it doesn't crack when we send it for firing. Hi. I'm making this. Let me show you. I'm making a half portrait vase. This is the sketch that I drew. You can see. This is the sketch that I drew. This is a half portrait that I've been obsessed with recently, and the vase shape of this cone rectangle chimney on the top. So this is like a little whimsical vase that I'm trying to sculpt at the moment. Of course, the sketch and the finished product looks slightly different. I think that's always when happens when you're sculpting. You kind of have new ideas, you kind of have a better visual when you translate from 2D to 3D. So it's really messy at this point, but once we have joined the two parts together and make sure we have sufficient clay to hold them together, right now we'll do the snoodling process, which is we'll even out the parts where they join to smooth it out. Right, and all you need to do is just use your fingers and water to kind of mold it to how you want. Right, if you feel there's any excessive clay on the rich side, you would just kind of mold it and push it down to the bottom. And you want to make sure there's no visible joint lines. It means, because if you see visible joint lines, it means it might not have enough clay to support the joint. So you just want to add a bit there. Yep. So if you see, this is how it is now. Slanted little fella, nice. It's kind of cute and whimsical in its own way. Don't really like the protrudingness of this. I might want to just add a bit more clay so it's rounder. But I think it's turning out great from the sketch. Not exactly a 1:1, but kind of enjoyed it. Right. So I think this part requires maybe just have a bit of roundiness to the hair. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly, using water, and add in additional clay to create like a bobbed joint over here. And you kind of just use your finger to smoothen out. Right, it looks like it has a bump on his head. But see, now that it doesn't, it is no longer a straight cut down, so there's a little bob joining it. I probably need just a bit more clay to smooth this part. And we got our rough shape. Then we got a rough shape up. I'm quite happy with it. Right. The next step would definitely be cleaning up all the details, bumps. I think before we do that, we need to make sure that the hole that we carve earlier on, it's all the way through to the bottom, so that you can see it goes through. You can see, but it's not exactly perfect. So because when you drawing, I think it's not a complete perfect match from the hole that we carve at the top of his head to the chimney that we had. So what we'll do is we'll actually use our carve tool, maybe something thinner, wet it and just pull through. Right. I think this part you have to be slightly slower and gentle because the joint is still adhering. So you just kind of want to make sure you carve out a nice hole from the top to the bottom. Once you have that, the next easy part is just to smooth out the wall. And I always like to just use a brush to do that. And you want to pull through your strokes, right? So you reach all the way to the end and you pull so that it's smooth. Instead of doing this, I think because you might leave marks halfway, so you want to pull through on all the walls to smooth it out. And then just check from the inside. It doesn't have to be the most neat because it's on the inside. Sometimes we can kind of get away with it. So it's definitely up to your own tolerance level of how perfect you want it to be. But here we kind of embrace the part of it not being the most perfect. Sure. So there were it from the sculpture that we did yesterday, the two parts, the portrait and the chimney. We left it to dry overnight. We managed to hollow things out, and then we did the attachment today, and we got to where our sketch was, right? The only remaining part is definitely just to clean up the bumpy edges and to double check the sculpt area of the face. Everything is perfect and the piece will be done. Yes, it's actually a very good way of doing. I always like to use brush because it can reach in much easier than my fingers can. Even on the outside, sometimes, especially when the clay is still quite moist, a brush can often clean up much better than a sponge does. Right, but because today I think the clay is already slightly on the drier side, so the brush is not doing as much on the outside. So I'll just use force using my fingers and thumb. Right, I don't really like to use the sponge because I think the sponge always collects dust and then it kind of adds dust to the piece. There are times where I like to use it probably on bigger pieces, but sometimes I think just using our fingers are good enough. Yes, to give it a try and see how it works out for you. I think I was using a lot of sponges in the start, but I just kind of couldn't get a very smooth finish. And I couldn't reach for very small areas that the brush could. So right now it's just really smoothing out the patches. Again, doesn't be the most perfect because I kind of light it with a little bit of raw texture to it. So just using fingers is good. And then once it's much drier, then I can start to carve out and clean up the details further if I want to. Or I could even create raw textures with other tools. But for now, it's just make sure that the shape is to my liking and most of the sides are smooth. So I think this is almost there. And then I need to... thanks for the subscription. Do you also do hand building as well? I mostly do hand building because I prefer sculpting as opposed to wheel throwing. I think there's so much fun when just using your hands to create pieces like this. And then now we'll just kind of create the shape and flatten the edges. Because we still want the blockish chimney on the edges. So using a tool like this is good to flatten and refine the edges. There we go. Now we just need to clean up a little bit because it's not the most even. I just want to carve it slightly. This side. And this as well. Okay, I think it's quite even on the sides as I want it to be. And then I'm just gonna smooth it out. Just let the bending wheel do the circular motion to clean out and smooth it. And same thing. And there we have it. Now I just need to flatten the top and the edges. And we did it. We have managed to finish our sculpt. But this is not the end of it, because we haven't thought of how we would do the hands that accompany it. And I might leave this to dry again before I come back and clean and do the final sculpting. Right, because I haven't really fixed the face area yet. But what I'll do next definitely is also haven't given it a thought of how the hands will accompany it. So I often have a tiny hand that goes with it. Right, this is a piece that I've sculpted for my other portrait. And this is still drying. It's almost probably a week dry. And you have this, they always come in a pair, whether it's two hands or just a hand. So same with this piece, I think I'll try and create and draw a hand figurine to accompany it. I was clear work that has light and dark. You have to do something and get the coloration for unglaze. Not quite. If you're talking about this piece that you're showing, there's like this unevenness of the color. I actually have not much clue. I would assume because it's the drying temperature at the moment, because this is not bone dry at the moment, so it's quite patchy, right? And I used to work with this clay when I was in Finland. The temperature here in Singapore and Finland is different, so I'm also still trying to observe why it's this patchy. But what I'll do is probably I would, before it gets completely bone dry, I would just use some sponge and water to clean it, just to make sure it's nice and even. But again, with this brown clay that I'm using specifically, it's actually very interesting because I did a few pieces unglazed. Let me show you. Let me just put this here, and let me show you the pieces that I've done. Was it this piece or this? So this is the exact same clay that I'm used to sculpt right now, and this is fired to cone 6, if I remember. That's 1250 degrees. So this is unglazed. But if you can see the finish, I don't know whether it's the lighting, it has this very uneven color to it. It's almost like the color pencil sketch, which is very pretty. It's not a solid color. And I really love the look when it's fired unglazed. Maybe it's too light. You can see. Not so sure. There's a bit of like variation. Some parts are darker, some parts are lighter. But this is the beauty of this clay, which I really love. And I'm glad that I managed to get some of this clay here back at home when I tried this in Finland. So I really am excited for this clay. And you can see this is how it looks when it's raw. It's not even dry. It's not even fired. This is really dark brown. But when you fire it to a high fire temperature, it becomes this really nice light brown color. And I don't do much glazes to my pottery. I kind of like them unglazed. But I did try this. Let me show you. I also did try using a clear cracker glaze, which came out to be quite interesting. So this was the brown clay that you see earlier. This is the unglazed part. And I only kind of glaze the hair area and maybe the eyes and eyebrow. But you see it can turn out to be this very nice dark brown. And if you can notice, I don't know whether you can see as much, there's a little bit of cracker on it, which you can only see if you put it up close. But this is really a very, very nice clay. I really love the finish of this clay. And also, I also explored using Anglo. It's almost like an underglaze. And just color it. It doesn't quite absorb the colored slip that well, but somehow it has that patchiness of the original clay. So it's quite interesting. So this clay is definitely one of my favorite to use. And let's just go back to cleaning this. Yes, this clay, it's a Spanish clay. And I really love that it's one of the most beautiful unglazed clay that I've worked with. And I don't need to worry because glazing is almost a whole different experiment by itself. There's so much trial and error, and sometimes it can be really stressful. So I really kind of like it when my pieces are unglazed. So it's one less worry. I can just focus on hand building my pieces. So this is the finished product. I still have to clean up the face and maybe add a bit of texture, but that requires it to be a little more dry. What I can do now is I can continue to just clean up slightly. But I think it's much easier to carve out the details when it's even drier. So this is what we did for today. Tomorrow probably we'll continue down with creating the hands that goes with it. I have a few ideas. Perhaps the hands is holding on to it, but I haven't really figured out how that works or how I'm going to sculpt it. Sometimes I just maybe am a little bit too ambitious, but we'll see. I think I'll just leave this to dry tonight, and I'll clean this up tomorrow, and we'll do the hands as well. So thank you for staying and watching this sculpting process. I hope it was useful for you and you have learned something. And if you have any tips, feel free to share. I would love to connect and we can learn more of this hand building process together. So I'll be streaming tomorrow as well around the same time, which is it's Singapore time 9 p.m. Don't know whichever time zone you're in. So I usually stream on the same time schedule, and I'm still quite new to all this. I'm still trying to figure out the angles and everything. I might want to do a top-down look of my process work, but it's an ongoing process and a learning journey. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow if you are available. Thanks for watching.